She ruled New York's skyline with unstoppable power. But every night, the billionaire CEO returned to a forgotten street where her father died. When a struggling single dad followed her, he uncovered a secret stronger than wealth. They said she owned every building in the city, every shining tower that cut through the clouds, every boardroom where million-dollar decisions were made in seconds. Her name was Isabella Laurent, and in New York City, that name carried weight. Financial channels repeated it daily. Business magazines printed her photo on glossy covers. Investors trusted her instincts more than the market itself. At only 34, she was the billionaire CEO who turned struggling companies into global empires. From her glass penthouse overlooking Manhattan, she could see the skyline she helped shape. People believed she had everything: power, influence, wealth beyond imagination, but none of them noticed what happened after midnight. Daniel Carter did. Daniel was a single father who measured his success differently. For him, success meant paying rent on time, keeping food in the fridge, and seeing his 8-year-old son Noah smile before school. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, his life had narrowed into 2 priorities: work and fatherhood. He worked long shifts as a security guard in one of Manhattan's luxury corporate towers, ironically owned by Isabella's company. Every evening he watched executives in tailored suits walk past him without eye contact. He observed wealth up close, but it never belonged to him. Still, Daniel carried himself with quiet dignity. He did not envy the rich, he simply focused on surviving. Over weeks, he began noticing a pattern. Around 11:45 p.m., long after most employees had gone home, a black luxury sedan would pull up behind the building. Isabella Laurent would step out alone. No bodyguards, no assistant, no flashing cameras. She would exchange a few quiet words with the driver, then wave him off. Instead of heading toward her penthouse uptown, she walked in the opposite direction, toward the subway. At first, Daniel assumed it was a coincidence. Powerful people had unusual routines, but it happened every night. Curiosity is a strange thing. It grows quietly until it refuses to stay silent. One night, after finishing his shift and calling to check that Noah was asleep at home with their elderly neighbor watching him, Daniel made a decision he normally wouldn't. He followed her, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion. She moved quickly, confidently at first. The bright lights of Manhattan faded behind them as she traveled deeper into Brooklyn. The streets became quieter, storefronts older, sidewalks cracked and uneven. It was not a place where billionaires were expected to wander alone. Finally, she stopped. Under a flickering streetlight on a narrow, worn-down block, Isabella Laurent slowly lowered herself onto the curb. She did not look like the woman from the magazine covers. Her posture softened. Her shoulders dropped. The city's most powerful CEO stared at the pavement as if it held secrets only she could see. Daniel felt a wave of hesitation. This was none of his business. Yet something about the loneliness in her expression felt familiar. He had seen that same emptiness in the mirror after his wife passed away. He stepped closer, careful with his tone. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up, surprised but not frightened. For a moment, their worlds collided in silence. The billionaire and the security guard. The woman who commanded boardrooms and the man who checked parking permits. "You shouldn't be here alone," he added gently. A faint, almost tired smile crossed her face. "I'm not alone," she replied. "This street remembers me." He did not understand. She ran her fingers along the rough concrete beside her, almost affectionately. "I own most of this city," she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual authority. "But I can't leave this street." The words hung in the air between them. Daniel glanced around. There was nothing remarkable about the block. An abandoned storefront, a faded brick building, a closed grocery shop with dusty windows. It felt forgotten. "Why not?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her gaze returned to the ground. The confidence that dominated corporate interviews was gone. In its place was something raw. "Because this," she said, barely above a whisper, "is where everything changed." A cold breeze moved down the street, rustling old newspapers along the curb. Daniel felt it then. This wasn't about business. It wasn't about wealth. It was about memory. He sat down on the curb a few feet away, leaving respectful space between them. He did not know why he stayed. Maybe because grief recognizes grief. Maybe because sometimes strangers can listen better than friends. For the first time in years, Isabella Laurent did not look like a billionaire CEO. She looked like someone still standing in the shadow of her past. And Daniel had the feeling that whatever kept bringing her back to this street was far more powerful than money. The street was quieter than the rest of Brooklyn, as if time had decided to slow down there. The flickering streetlight above them buzzed softly, casting uneven shadows across the cracked pavement. Isabella Laurent did not look at Daniel when she began to speak. Her eyes remained fixed on the old brick building across the road, its paint peeling, its windows dark. "That used to be ours," she said calmly, pointing toward the closed grocery store. "My father's shop." Daniel followed her gaze. It was hard to imagine the most powerful CEO in New York City growing up above a place like that, but there was no doubt in her voice. This was not a story rehearsed for interviews. This was something she carried every day. She explained that her father had been a proud man who believed in honest work. He opened the grocery store with borrowed money and endless hope. For a while, business was steady. The neighborhood trusted him. Families came daily. Children ran in and out with coins in their hands. But then large corporate chains began expanding into the area. Investors bought properties. Rents increased. Suppliers raised prices. Her father tried to compete, but small shops rarely win against powerful corporations. Bills piled up. Letters stamped in red arrived weekly. Isabella remembered sitting at the small kitchen table upstairs, watching her father stare at numbers long after midnight. He never complained in front of her, but she could see exhaustion carving lines into his face. Daniel listened without interruption. He understood financial pressure in his own way, though on a much smaller scale. He knew what it felt like to stretch every dollar, to pretend things were fine for the sake of a child. "One night it rained harder than I'd ever seen," Isabella continued, her voice steady but distant. "The power went out in half the neighborhood. The shop had been struggling for months. That evening, my father received another notice, final warning." She paused, swallowing gently. "He stepped outside for air. I followed him. I thought he just needed a moment." The wind moved through the empty street as if replaying the memory. "He collapsed right there," she said, pointing to the exact spot a few feet from where they sat. No dramatic speech, no warning, just fell. For the first time, her voice weakened. "I was 16. I didn't know what to do. I ran for help. I remember my shoes slipping on the wet pavement. I remember banging on doors. By the time I came back with neighbors, he was gone." Silence settled between them. The city in the distance hummed faintly, unaware of the confession unfolding in its shadows. "I keep thinking," she whispered, "if I had run faster, if I had stayed with him instead of leaving, maybe he wouldn't have felt alone in his final moments." Daniel felt the weight of those words. Guilt does not follow logic. It attaches itself to seconds and refuses to let go. He had lived with his own version of that question for years. What if he had taken his wife to a different doctor? What if he had insisted on earlier tests? What if he had noticed something sooner? The mind rewrites the past in cruel ways. "That night changed everything," Isabella continued. "Within months, the store closed. Creditors took what little we had. I promised myself I would never be powerless again. I studied harder than anyone. I worked without sleep. I built an empire so no one could ever corner me the way they cornered him." She finally turned to face Daniel. "And I succeeded. I own skyscrapers now. I influence markets. The same type of corporations that crushed my father answer to me." There was no pride in her tone, only emptiness. "But none of it changes this street," she said softly. "Every deal I close, every company I acquire, it still brings me back here, to the place where I failed him." Daniel shook his head gently. "You were a child. You didn't fail anyone." Her eyes hardened slightly, not in anger, but in resistance. "That's what everyone says." "And it's still true," Daniel replied quietly. She looked away again, wrestling with words she had likely never spoken aloud before. "I built everything to escape this feeling," she admitted. "But success doesn't erase memory. It just makes it quieter during the day. At night, it gets louder again." Daniel understood. Pain often waits for silence. "So you come back," he said. "Yes," she nodded, "every night. Because if I don't face it, I feel like I'm abandoning him all over again." Daniel studied the closed storefront across the street. He imagined a younger Isabella standing under that same light, terrified and helpless. The powerful CEO the world admired was still carrying that 16-year-old girl inside her. The wind softened. The city felt less distant. For the first time, Isabella did not look trapped by the street. She looked trapped by the guilt tied to it, and Daniel knew that no amount of money could free someone from that kind of prison. The night felt heavier after Isabella's confession, but something had shifted between them. The distance that normally separates a billionaire CEO and a security guard no longer mattered. They were just two people sitting on a quiet Brooklyn curb, both carrying memories that refused to fade. Isabella remained silent for a while, her eyes tracing invisible patterns on the pavement, as if replaying that rainy night in her mind. Daniel could see that she was not used to sharing this part of herself. In boardrooms, she controlled every conversation. In interviews, she answered only what was necessary. But here, under a flickering streetlight, control seemed meaningless. "You ever lose someone suddenly?" she asked without looking at him. Daniel exhaled slowly. He rarely spoke about his wife to strangers. Even friends received only short answers, but something about Isabella's honesty made it difficult to hide. "Yes," he said quietly. "My wife, 3 years ago." She turned toward him slightly, giving him her full attention. "It wasn't dramatic," Daniel continued. "No accident, no warning sirens. She just started feeling tired all the time. We thought it was stress. I told her to rest more. She told me not to worry." He forced a small smile at the memory. "By the time we realized it was serious, it was too late. Hospital rooms, machines, doctors speaking in careful tones." He paused, his voice tightening. "I remember holding her hand and telling her everything would be fine. I knew I was lying, but I couldn't say goodbye like that, not while she was looking at me." Isabella listened without interrupting. "After she passed," Daniel continued, "I kept replaying every moment, every missed sign, every appointment we didn't schedule sooner. I kept thinking maybe if I had pushed harder, asked more questions, noticed something earlier." He shook his head gently. "Guilt doesn't care about logic. It just finds a place to sit and refuses to move." Isabella's expression softened. "How did you stop blaming yourself?" Daniel gave a quiet, almost humorless laugh. "I didn't, not completely. I just realized something." He looked at her directly. "If I kept living in that moment, my son would lose both parents instead of one." The words lingered in the cold air. "For a while, I avoided the hospital area completely. Even driving near it felt impossible. But one day, Noah asked me why we never visit the park across from it anymore. That's when I understood. I wasn't honoring my wife by avoiding the place. I was letting pain decide my life." Isabella absorbed every word carefully. Her usual sharp confidence was replaced by quiet reflection. "So what did you do?" he asked. "I went back," Daniel replied simply. "It wasn't easy. I sat in my car for almost an hour before stepping out, but I went. Not to relive the worst day of my life, just to remind myself that it was a part of my story, not the end of it." Isabella's eyes glistened faintly under the streetlight, though no tears fell. "I come here because I think I owe it to him," she said softly. "If I stop coming, it feels like I'm forgetting." Daniel shook his head gently. There's a difference between remembering and punishing yourself. That sentence hit deeper than he intended. She looked down at her hands. I built everything so I would never feel that powerless again. I outworked everyone. I outsmarted competitors. I turned weakness into strategy. But none of it fixes that night. Because you're trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing, Daniel said calmly. You were a scared 16-year-old girl. That's not failure. That's life being unfair. Isabella inhaled slowly, as if testing the weight of his words. Do you ever miss who you were before? She asked. Every day, Daniel admitted. But I also know I wouldn't be the father I am now without going through that pain. It shaped me. It didn't destroy me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city's distant sounds blended with the soft hum of the streetlight. Something unspoken connected them. Two different worlds, united by loss. I don't usually talk like this, Isabella said finally. I don't usually follow billionaires down dark streets, Daniel replied gently. A faint smile appeared on her face for the first time that night. Not the polished smile she gave cameras, but something real. Maybe, she said quietly. I don't need to keep sitting here every night. Daniel nodded. You can honor him without living in that moment. She looked across at the old storefront again, but this time her expression was different, less haunted, more thoughtful. For the first time in years, the street did not feel like a prison. It felt like a memory. And memories, Daniel knew, only hold power when we refuse to forgive ourselves. The fragile peace Isabella had begun to feel on that quiet Brooklyn street did not last long. Power attracts attention, and attention attracts pressure. Within weeks, whispers started moving through the upper floors of her corporate headquarters in New York City. A massive merger was underway, one that would secure her company's dominance for the next decade. Investors were watching closely. Competitors were nervous. The media was hungry for flaws. Isabella had always thrived under pressure, but this time the threat felt different. It wasn't about financial risk, it was personal. A rival investment group had dug into her past, bankruptcy records, old court filings tied to her father's failed grocery store, photographs of the closed storefront from years ago. They planned to frame it as a weakness in her leadership narrative. Anonymous sources began feeding reporters subtle hints. Headlines started appearing online. From poverty to power, the untold struggles of a CEO. On the surface, it sounded inspiring, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders when she arrived at the street that night. Inspiration wasn't what her rivals intended. They wanted doubt. They wanted shareholders to question whether unresolved trauma clouded her judgment. She sat on the curb as usual, but this time her composure cracked slightly. They're digging everything up, she said quietly. My father's deaths, the lawsuits, even interviews from neighbors who remember the night he died. Her voice held frustration, but beneath it was something deeper. Fear. Not of losing money, but of losing control over the story she had built so carefully. Daniel listened carefully. And what are they saying? That I'm driven by emotion, that my decisions are rooted in revenge against corporations like the ones that crushed my father's shop. They're suggesting I'm unstable. She gave a bitter smile. Apparently, billionaires are only respected if they appear untouched by pain. Daniel understood the cruelty of public narratives. People liked simple stories, strength without scars, success without struggle. Anything complicated made them uncomfortable. What does your board say? He asked. They want me to stay silent, let the lawyers handle it, deny anything that makes me look vulnerable. She stared at the old storefront across the street. They think admitting this place still matters to me will make me look weak. Daniel leaned back slightly against the cold brick wall behind them. Does it make you weak? She didn't answer immediately. I built an empire to prove I was stronger than that night, she finally said. If they turn it into a pity story, it cheapens everything. Or, Daniel said carefully, it shows why you're strong. She turned toward him, eyes sharp but curious. You didn't become powerful because life was easy. You became powerful because it wasn't. That's not instability, that's resilience. She considered his words, but the tension remained. Markets don't reward vulnerability. Maybe not, Daniel said calmly, "but people do." The next morning, the pressure intensified. A financial news outlet released a detailed article outlining her father's bankruptcy. Photos of the boarded-up grocery store circulated online. Analysts debated whether emotional motivation influenced her aggressive acquisition strategies. Her board demanded a formal statement. Investors requested reassurance calls. The narrative was slipping out of her control. That night, she returned to the street earlier than usual. Daniel was already there, having sensed from her brief message that something had escalated. She stood instead of sitting, pacing slowly along the sidewalk. "They're digging everything up," she said. "They're trying to remind me who I used to be." Daniel looked around at the dim street, then back at her. "Maybe that's exactly what you need." She stopped pacing. "What do you mean?" "Stop hiding it," he said simply. "You keep coming here because it matters, so let it matter publicly. Don't let them twist it. Tell it yourself." She studied him carefully, as if weighing a risky investment. "If I speak openly about this, I lose the image of being untouchable." Daniel shook his head. "No one is untouchable. The strongest leaders are the ones who don't pretend to be." The city lights flickered in the distance. Isabella looked at the storefront once more, but this time not with shame, with contemplation. "They want to use this street against me," she said slowly. "What if I use it instead?" Daniel felt a small smile form. That sounds more like the CEO everyone fears. For the first time since the headlines appeared, her posture straightened not out of defensiveness, but clarity. The threat was real. The scrutiny would intensify, but something had changed. The street no longer felt like a secret vulnerability. It felt like leverage. And as Isabella stood beneath that flickering light, Daniel realized the investors had underestimated something far more powerful than market trends. They had underestimated a woman who had already survived losing everything once before. By the end of the week, the media storm had reached its peak. Business channels debated Isabella Laurent's leadership style. Analysts dissected her childhood as if it were a quarterly earnings report. Old photographs of the closed grocery store circulated beside glossy images of her corporate towers in New York City. Commentators questioned whether her past made her visionary or unstable. The board of directors urged her to issue a carefully worded statement crafted by lawyers. "Stay strategic, stay controlled," they advised. But for the first time in her career, Isabella chose a different approach. Instead of hosting a press conference inside a polished skyscraper lobby, she announced that she would speak somewhere else. The location surprised everyone. Reporters arrived expecting a dramatic reveal, but what they found was the same worn Brooklyn street that had quietly shaped her life. Cameras lined the sidewalks, neighbors peeked from apartment windows. Daniel stood at a distance, hands in his jacket pockets, watching silently as she stepped up to a simple podium placed directly in front of the old storefront. There were no dramatic lights, no corporate banners, just honesty. She looked at the building behind her before facing the cameras. For a brief second, the confident CEO expression softened into something deeply human. Then she began. "Yes," she said clearly, "my father owned this grocery store. And yes, it failed." The crowd of reporters grew still. "He worked harder than anyone I've ever known. But sometimes hard work is not enough when powerful systems are stacked against small businesses. I was 16 when I watched him collapse on this sidewalk. That night changed me." There was no tremor in her voice, only steady truth. "For years, I thought success meant proving that I would never feel that powerless again. So I built, I acquired, I expanded. I turned pain into fuel." She paused briefly. "But I've realized something important. Success without purpose is empty." The headlines she had feared were now unfolding in real time, but she was controlling them. "I'm not ashamed of this street," she continued. "I'm proud of it. It taught me resilience. It taught me to understand struggle. And it reminds me that leadership is not about erasing your past. It's about transforming it." Daniel felt something shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't damage control. It was reclamation. Then Isabella revealed what no one expected. "This entire block has been purchased," she announced. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. But it will not become another luxury development. It will become a community center in my father's name. We will provide small business grants, financial education programs, and scholarships for families who feel overlooked by larger systems. The reporters began shouting questions. "Is this a publicity move?" one asked. "Are you trying to repair your image before the merger vote?" Isabella met their energy calmly. "If improving lives repairs my image, then I'm comfortable with that." Applause broke out from neighbors who had gathered nearby. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming, but it was real. Within days, construction crews arrived, not to demolish the building entirely, but to restore it. The faded brick was cleaned, broken windows replaced. The old grocery sign was redesigned with subtle respect to its original form. Daniel often walked past after work with Noah, watching the progress. For the first time, the street felt alive again. Inside the boardroom, reactions were mixed. Some investors worried about short-term profit margins. Others quietly admired the bold move. But something unexpected happened. Public sentiment shifted strongly in her favor. Articles that once questioned her emotional stability now praised her authenticity. Analysts reframed her narrative as strategic empathy rather than weakness. One evening, weeks into the renovation, Isabella returned to the street without cameras. Daniel was already there. "It's strange," she admitted softly, watching workers install new lights along the sidewalk. "I thought speaking about this would make me feel exposed." "And?" Daniel asked. "It made me feel free." He nodded. "Because it's not a secret anymore." She smiled slightly. "For years, I believed this place represented my greatest failure. Now, it feels like my greatest lesson." Children from nearby buildings began gathering out of curiosity, peeking at the transformation. An elderly man approached her, introducing himself as someone who used to shop at her father's store decades ago. He thanked him quietly. The gratitude in his voice carried more weight than any market approval. As the sun set over Brooklyn, warm light reflected off the renovated windows. The street no longer felt frozen in time. It felt renewed. Daniel watched Isabella stand a little taller, not because of power, but because of peace. She had not erased the past. She had rewritten its ending. And for the first time, the street that once held her in place was becoming something that allowed her to move forward. The grand opening of the Laurent Community Center arrived on a clear autumn morning, and the once-forgotten Brooklyn street felt almost unrecognizable. Fresh paint covered the brick walls. New streetlights replaced the old flickering one that had witnessed years of silent midnight visits. A modest sign hung above the restored storefront, bearing her father's name in clean, simple letters. There were no oversized corporate logos, no towering banners celebrating her company. This day was not about business. It was about closure. Residents gathered along the sidewalk, some out of curiosity, others with genuine gratitude. Children chased each other near the entrance, their laughter echoing in a place that had once carried only heavy memories. Isabella stood near the doorway, dressed elegantly but without the intimidating sharpness she carried in boardrooms across New York City. Reporters were present, but the atmosphere felt different from the tense press conference weeks earlier. Today, the story was no longer about scandal or speculation, it was about impact. Daniel arrived with Noah beside him, the young boy's eyes wide as he took in the transformation. He had heard the story in small pieces over dinner conversations with his father, but seeing it in person made it real. When Isabella noticed them, her expression softened immediately. "You made it," she said warmly. "Wouldn't mess it," Daniel replied. A small ribbon stretched across the entrance. As Isabella stepped forward to speak, the crowd quieted. She did not use dramatic language. She did not speak like a CEO presenting quarterly growth. Instead, her voice carried something steady and grounded. "This street once represented the worst night of my life," she began honestly. "For years, I believed coming back here meant holding on to my father, but I've learned that honoring someone doesn't mean staying frozen in pain. It means building something that reflects what they believed in." She glanced at the children gathered near the front. "My father believed in hard work, community, and second chances. This center is dedicated to those values." Any small business owner who feels overwhelmed will find guidance here. Any child who needs tutoring will have it. No one should feel alone in moments of struggle. Applause rose naturally, not forced. Daniel watched her carefully. There was no trace of the haunted expression he had first seen under the dim streetlight months ago. The weight she used to carry so visibly seemed lighter. After the ribbon was cut and the doors opened, neighbors stepped inside to explore. The interior blended modern design with subtle reminders of the old grocery store. A framed photograph of her father hung near the entrance, not as a monument to tragedy, but as a tribute to perseverance. Volunteers greeted families. Local business owners asked about grant applications. The building buzzed with life. Later that evening, after the crowd dispersed and the street grew quiet again, Isabella found herself standing on the sidewalk where it had all begun. Daniel joined her, hands in his pockets, Noah holding a brochure from the center proudly. "It's different now," she said softly, looking around. "It is," Daniel agreed, "but you're different too." She considered that. For a long time, I thought power meant never feeling weak again. I built walls so high that no one could see where I came from. She paused, breathing in the cool air. "But those walls kept me trapped just as much as they protected me." Daniel nodded. "Letting people see your story didn't make you smaller. It made you real." She smiled faintly. "You know, the night we met, I truly believed I would always come back here out of guilt. I thought if I stopped, it meant I was forgetting him." "And now?" he asked gently. "Now I know he wouldn't want me sitting on a curb for the rest of my life." A comfortable silence settled between them. The new streetlights cast a steady glow, no longer flickering uncertainly. The old grocery storefront, once boarded and abandoned, now radiated warmth from inside. It felt alive. Noah tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Dad, can we come back here tomorrow? They said they're starting a small business club for kids." Daniel chuckled softly. "Looks like you've got competition," he said to Isabella. "I'll take that as a compliment," she replied. She looked one last time at the exact spot where her father had collapsed years ago. The pavement was the same, but the meaning had changed. It was no longer the place where everything ended. It was the place where something new began. "I used to think I owned this city," she said quietly, "but I couldn't leave this street." Daniel waited. "Now," she continued, her voice steady, "I don't need to leave it. I finally moved beyond it." And with that, she took a step forward, not away from her past, but beyond its hold on her. The billionaire CEO who once ruled skyscrapers had discovered something far more powerful than wealth. She had found peace. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe to Drew Daily Stories for more powerful, emotional journeys about strength, sacrifice, and second chances. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and tell us in the comments, what does true success mean to you?